Welcome to the You're Not Crazy podcast, hosted by Jessica Knight, a certified life coach who specializes in healing from narcissistic and emotional abuse. This podcast is intended to help you identify manipulative and abusive behavior, set boundaries with yourself and others, and heal the relationship with yourself so you can learn to love in a healthy way. You can connect with Jessica and find additional resources, content, and coaching at emotionalabusecoach.com.
Hello, and thank you so much for being here. Today we have a very special guest, Amy Fielder. I found Amy on Threads initially because I resonated with so much of her content on how we can begin to understand our own trauma, stop judging ourselves for the way that we feel, and to really look at how trauma is part of a driving force in our relationships. Amy is a certified trauma support specialist, and she works with people to begin to refine themselves, understand why they feel the way that they do, understand how and what is creating their emotions and therefore the behaviors, and how to begin to lean into what is healthy. And all that comes along with how they can begin to heal after an abusive relationship. I really loved my conversation with her, and I think you're going to get so much from this. I think that it's going to help you begin to reclaim the part of you that may feel like it is gone or was taken in some way as a result of being in an abusive relationship or having an abusive upbringing. You can find Amy at amyfielder.com, and I will put all her links in the show notes. Hi, Amy. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Can you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
Sure. Yeah. Well, a little bit about me. I am a first-time mom. And I've been doing this work, though, for well over 10 years now. I probably say around 11, 12 years at this point. And I got into it because I struggled so much as a teenager emotionally. Mm-hmm. And I went the conventional route of like trying to find therapists. At that age, I wasn't really picking my own therapist. My parents were, and I didn't have a good experience taking that route. Yeah. I felt like I was treated the same as anyone else that walked into that office and handed the same workbook that everybody else was getting. And so needless to say, I kind of strayed from that course and tried to help myself through other alternative measures, taking spiritual approaches, self-help approaches, all of these different ways, and was in a completely different career path, mind you, as I continued this journey of figuring myself out and trying to understand my emotions and my struggles in relationships. And then one day I got sick of, I was working in fashion, and I just got tired of it and didn't feel like I was adding value. Like it didn't feel as meaningful as I wanted the work that I was doing to be. And I spent some time trying to figure out what I wanted to do and what made me happy and what came natural. And this made sense to me. So here I am.
Yeah. Your story and mine are very, very aligned. Yeah. Almost the exact same thing. Like stumbling in and out of therapists and other healers' offices and being like, this does not help. Like, what did I get out of that? And then like finding, I actually found a life coach. I think I was like I must have been 19, and I stumbled on that, and it kept being the thing I wanted to come back to. Especially as I, struggled through jobs and relationships and things like that.
Yeah, it's easier to do a job when I have found it's easier to do the work when it is an extension of yourself, because it kind of fuels it, you're more passionate, and it's more powerful and impactful when there is that connection to it. And obviously not everybody goes into their career path that way. But for me, I mean, I don't think anyone would just get into this profession for fun.
Oh, no. I say that all the time. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to be really like deeply rooted in what you're doing and really be passionate about it. And I just know constantly saying when I got started, I don't want anyone to feel the way I used to feel. And I don't want anyone to struggle the way I used to struggle and feel alone when you're trying to get help and it's not helping. So yeah, it makes me really happy and I feel very fulfilled doing this type of work.
Yeah. Yeah. And do you mostly work with, it's probably a mix of, actually, it's also probably the same thing. People healing from toxic relationships or more so healing from like toxic upbringings?
Both. It's definitely a combo of both. I work with men and women. I work with people all over the world. You know, when you work online, that's pretty easy to do. But yeah, it's a combination. I have a lot of childhood trauma stuff. I have a lot of religious trauma. And then there's the adulthood stuff, a lot of relational stuff and emotional neglect, emotional abuse, toxic relationships, narcissistic stuff, things like that.
Yeah. Yeah. It all intertwines, especially when you start looking at your patterns, your own patterns.
Yeah.
Well, I initially found you on Threads, I believe. I think our content is pretty similar, and a lot of your content really spoke to me because I went through a breakup that I haven't talked about on the podcast at all, really. Maybe once in passing, but I just haven't felt like ready to like unload it back in February. And when I found your content, I wrote down the quote that really stuck out to me. And it was, after trauma, your inner voice doesn't sound like you. It sounds like those who hurt you. And that spoke to me so strongly because in the relationship, I was keeping these boundaries really strong. Like I would be able to say, no, this is crazy. Like, no, you're being ridiculous. Like, no, that's not about you. You know, like I was able to like really kind of like, my inner voice was strong after the relationship, though, after the discard, not at all. And I realized that voice that was in my head all the time, it took probably about a month to realize it was him and that it was there for a while. I was just sort of like covering it up, dissociating. But since I do similar work to you, that quote really stuck out to me because I think it's one of the hardest things when people start unraveling and trying to heal at the very, very beginning is that they're not listening to their own self sometimes. They are listening to the other person's voice, like the voice that wants to control them, keep them small, have power over them.
Yeah.
And so do you feel like one of the first steps in beginning to heal is actually almost like reclaiming and recapturing that inner voice?
I would say that's definitely one of a few, what I like to call like key foundational steps towards healing. Some of the others are rebuilding your self-trust, which they all connect, and boundary setting are two other really key components here. And really, I wouldn't say there's a particular order you need to do it in because it's so, and you know this, it's so layered that the minute you dive into, let's say, learning how to set boundaries, you start realizing you have to trust yourself in order to set and respect a boundary. And in order to even like identify what those boundaries are, you have to be able to tune into what you value. And that comes from your voice, not the voice of someone who maybe abused you at some point in your life or caused you some level of pain that was significant enough to internalize and become that inner narrative. So I would say those are like the three main areas that people need to start taking steps towards when they begin healing.
Yeah. And how do you suggest that people work to reclaim, almost like even sometimes I think it's even just getting to know their own inner voice?
I mean, the first step is exactly what that quote says, right? Being able to bring your awareness to the fact that that voice in your head, that critical voice, that judgmental voice, that's not your voice.
Yeah.
You weren't born. And it's almost more powerful, to be honest with you, Jessica, now for me, having had a baby 5 months ago, it's even more powerful when I talk about this because I immediately think of him and how he's being raised in his voice, because you're not born with a judgy voice in your head. You're not like, you don't pop out and go, where the hell am I?
Yeah. Yeah. Who am I? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
That's not yours. You're born so pure, right? And then you're a sponge and you soak it up from your environments. You soak it up from the behavioral modeling that you're exposed to. And then from there, it becomes those adaptive, behaviors and survival mechanisms that we start to develop over time based on the relationships that we have. And that starts fairly young, right? So that voice, if you're an adult listening to this, let's say you're in your 20s, your 30s, maybe you're almost in your 40s like I am, that voice in your head, I'm sure at this point, if you have not done the work to tune into it and really identify what belongs to you, the majority of it probably doesn't belong to you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that parallel to kids is, that's one of the things that helped me so much, especially in like my decision making of, am I going to continue down this pattern if this is how I'm showing up to this child who has that pure inner voice? I don't want to cause any of that. Like the world is going to give her enough judgment, shame, embarrassment, criticism. Like, I want to be the safe one that's like balancing it out for her. It's like really interesting when they go to school and my daughter's only 7. It's like she comes home with all of this like confusion and frustration. And when I look at her, I'm like, I can't imagine how it was for me when I would come home and I would get nothing. Like, and I would just sit with it.
Yeah.
And here's this little person who's like so concerned that like her friend said that she can't like play with them anymore. And it's like, and it's devastating for a 7-year-old, and it's like to just like, yeah, I think about that all the time. I mean, I think our kids can be so, they're our greatest teachers, at times. And I'm just like, wow, we really like the amount of work it takes to keep I think as adults don't realize how much noise comes into our head and our inner voice every day. Kids have it like tenfold, hundredfold maybe, but like I think recapturing it, like you said, it's so hard when we're in that place of being traumatized or recently coming out of a traumatic relationship. It can feel like that's a light year away. And I don't know if you feel this way, but I feel like once I really started to like listen to it and hear it, coming back to it when I was in circumstances that maybe brought me away from it, it was easier to come back and come back and come back. It wasn't like I was starting from ground zero again.
Yeah, I think you build off of it. I think once you start to, I always hear clients say this to me, once they start to unravel one thing in themselves, it's just like a ball of yarn, right? And before you know it, like, but it becomes easier. Like, so it feels like it's ongoing, but it does become easier over time, as you said, to come back to that voice. So the hardest step is that awareness component, becoming aware that that voice doesn't belong to you, right? Because I know for myself, I normalized it. That was just my voice, to down to the point where I would read like books and talk to therapists or whomever I was working with at the time. And I would say, no, I just need to like, that's just how I am. I'm a brutally honest person. I need to talk to myself that way. I need to, cut through the BS and get straight to the point. And the truth was, that's how that was the environment I was brought up in. That's the modeling that was shown to me. But was that Amy? Like if Amy takes herself out of those environments, if Amy takes herself away from those voices for a split second, that's all you have to do, just for a moment. And then ask yourself, well, how would I have said this to me? Or how would I want to say this to somebody else? Or how would I want this spoken to me? The answer was always different than what I was giving to me at that time.
Yeah.
So finding that way towards becoming aware of what you have operating inside of you is really a very difficult step. But like you said, does become very easy once you crack that door open. Then it's game on.
Yeah. Well, yeah, then it's like, if you feel like you have like come away from it, it's almost like it's like it doesn't fully leave. Where in the past, I feel like I would just like be gaslit and then thinking other people's thoughts, where it's like over time continuing to come back to it. And this is what when I talk to people about ungaslighting themselves, like when they're in these situations and that other person's voice, their narrative is stuck in their head and they're only responding to that. I constantly am telling my clients, like, in order to ungaslight yourself, you need to talk back to it about how you really feel. Whether like you don't have to say, you're not saying it to this person, but like literally writing down what you really feel just really helps to strengthen that voice and to remind yourself what your truth is. It's your reality. You don't have to live in somebody else's.
Yeah, learning to self-validate, your experience, your emotions, your perception. I think after you've been through any type of toxic relationship, that is a big struggle because you've always been talked away from yourself and made to feel in certain instances like you don't know. I mean, even myself, after years of work on myself, I remember when I first started dating again, this was years ago now, but when I first started dating, I mean, I was in my 30s, early 30s, and I would still do that to myself at times. And that brings into the conversation when people say to me, like, how long until I'm healed?
Oh, yeah. Oh my God.
This is a layered I don't look at it that way. There's no finish line to it. In my world, it's a lifestyle. It's like, this is just how I function in life. This is how I think about things. This is how I reflect about things, and growing and evolving as I continue to experience life and have new things happen to me and for me allows me to reveal another layer of something. And then we move through it again. And then another layer pops up and we move through that again. There's no designated finish line. And people really struggle with that when they start to untangle this stuff, especially after an abusive relationship, because they're like, well, when will all this go away?
Yeah.
And I wish I could tell you.
I know. I mean, like, if we knew, you and I would be billionaires if we knew the answer to that. And we just we're like, oh, and we could just give out that time frame every time, we would be, because I'm sure you've wondered that for yourself, right? But like you said, it's like this onion of constantly having to go through and heal. And, when I finally ever talk about this, I mean, clearly I need to, because it keeps coming up on, at least in the healing part of this conversation. But something I realized in this last breakup was that there are parts of my childhood that I have put in this little box and said, I've handled that. I've looked at it, but I'm not looking at it with different eyes. I'm not looking at it now that I have a child that is the age of some of the trauma I went through. I'm not looking at it in different lens. I'm not looking at different triggers. And it's it's not a shameful thing. So just like what you said, I'm also going to I do this work and I will be working with people to work on my own stuff probably forever. And I think that's the journey. But I think because the abusive relationship brings up so much, we just want to know when we're going to feel better. And I think sometimes the first step of that is surrendering to the idea of that it's going to be a journey of healing, but what's on the other side might be so much richer, so much more fulfilling, so much more you than you had any idea.
Yeah, people are looking for, I think, and it's valid that they
Yeah.
are, but they're looking for some big obvious shift when they start to work with you, or they start to try to heal some of the pain. And and I have to always redirect people to look at the small but very significant changes that are happening. Like, oh, look, notice how when you used to visit your father, you would leave and you were, like frozen and not able to really communicate very well with anybody for the next week. You isolated yourself. You were very triggered, whatever it was. And now you saw him for Father's Day and it was like a blip on your radar, right? Like I find that to be a rather significant shift, but they overlook these shifts because trauma, as you know, impacts so many things. It's not just your mind, it's your body, right? And
Yeah.
physiologically impacts you in ways that you don't even realize. Sometimes you're having these symptoms and you don't even realize you're having these symptoms because of that bad relationship that you were in a year ago, 6 months ago, 5 years ago, whatever it is. So they're looking for a big in your face shift, when what they need to do is refocus and redirect their attention on, wow, I was able to move through that and not panic. I was able to communicate and not second guess myself. I was able to self-validate and not go ask 5 of my friends if I'm valid for feeling this way or thinking this way or wanting this thing.
Yeah. And I wonder how much of that want for a big external shift comes from some of the like societal gaslighting around, like, just get over it, just see it. Can't you see he's a narcissist? Like, it's abusive, just get over it. You just need to move on. Like, the messaging we get, I think, from our support network that probably doesn't know how to support us a lot of the time with things like this. Like, it makes it appear as if the shift is a sudden an immediate shift once you realize something, and then people get upset, frustrated, or even like shameful that they can't or they don't realize that thing. They don't see it clearly.
Yeah, I agree. I also think that anybody that's like, can't you see that that's abusive, has either not looked at their stuff
Yeah.
or has not experienced abuse.
Right.
Because when you have been in, whether it was an actual narcissistic relationship or it was an abusive relationship, or like, we interchange these terms all the time, but let's just umbrella it under toxic, right?
Yeah.
Like, if you've been through it, then it's not easy to spot it. It's not easy to just get over it. It's not easy to leave it in the past. Those are people that don't have healthy coping tools, that are saying, move on. That happened 10 years ago. Why are you still talking about your childhood? Well, because my childhood shaped me into the adult that I am. And that's the driving force behind the people that I choose to keep the company of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. When people start feeling better and then they start stepping into relationships, I feel like it can be, and I know I felt this too, is like extremely disorienting and almost feeling like, I don't know how to do this. And I think I've noticed my clients be very triggered immediately, almost like looking for the red flags, which I think on some level is healthy. Right? If we just went through an abusive or toxic relationship, like, we want to be more mindful, especially if we've noticed in our healing that we're susceptible to some of the patterns, or we just sort of like, we get love bombed, don't see it, and then find ourselves in it. But I think it can be really hard to differentiate between, how can I lean into the trust that I have of myself, and begin to date consciously, understand my triggers and reactions, mixed with, I'm terrified to get stuck in this again.
Mm-hmm. Well, I always start people off by looking at what they value.
Yeah.
because I think here's the thing, right? When trauma can feel very confusing and very overwhelming, and the way it impacts you, especially when you're trying to get back into, let's say, dating, for instance, is, I mean, it can show up and present itself in different ways in different people, right? It can make people be closed off emotionally, or super judgmental, or, the list could go on. So because, and I take a lot of issue. I remember, I don't know, probably posting about this a lot a couple of years ago when I saw a lot of people talking about like red flags, red flags, red flags. And I started saying, we need to identify green flags. Yeah. Because for somebody who's been through trauma, when you fixate on red flags, you find more red flags, especially because of the way trauma impacts you. I could find a red flag anywhere I look if I really wanted to, if I don't understand how my nervous system is impacted and how my inner narrative is perpetuating these belief systems that I haven't yet looked at, that are harmful to me, that are making me self-sabotage or making me catastrophize or whatever. So if I look at a red flag, it's only going to trigger me and then activate these fight or flight responses and cause me to not want to move in that direction. So we need to acknowledge that red flags exist and we need to know what to do when we see one, but our focus should be on the green flags. And so what I would do with clients when they would come to me with that struggle is, let's start with looking at what you value and what you don't value behaviorally or communication wise when you're interacting with other people. And I have them work through a series of different homework assignments that I give to almost all of my clients who have that type of struggle. And then what we do is we talk about what I call the ripple effect. Once you identify what you value or what you don't value, let's identify how that ripples out into your world, mentally, emotionally, physically, relationally. How does it impact you when you're exposed to somebody who name calls you? How does it impact you and the rest of your day or week or conversations you have or your work or your parenting when you talk to somebody and they're dismissive or they invalidate you or whatever it is, right? And we go through the positives and the negatives of all that. And then they've got like a good sturdy foundation. So when they go to interact with their existing relationships or new ones, they feel much safer with themselves in those interactions and in their body, because not only do they then have a clear understanding of what to advocate for, i.e. what are the red flags for them, right? Because not everybody has the same ones, but they know exactly why they need to respect that boundary for themselves and uphold it, because they have a clear picture of how it impacts them, their life, and everybody in it. I don't know where that all came from, but
no, that was awesome. I love that. I'm going to ask the question that I think any client not any client, I hate using that phrase now. I don't know why it came out, but like why most clients would say to me, and I have an answer for it, but people know my answer. So I'm curious what yours is. If cause I think I think people are like, yes, I do need to understand my values. I need to understand this ripple effect for myself and like where this extends out to. I need to look at the people in my life, and then I can set boundaries. I can say, yeah, I can begin to say no and say yes when I mean it. But I wonder, like, when we are with a toxic or manipulative partner and they do not respect our boundaries, or they find our boundaries to be something to push back on, how do you suggest to your clients to begin to handle that and look at that?
It's based on context, right? So the way you are going to uphold a boundary with someone that you just met and talked to for 5 to 10 minutes is going to be significantly different than someone who maybe is a parent of yours or you've had an ongoing relationship with. But the goal, and I noticed, I don't know if you noticed, but that is one of the biggest things that people don't do.
Yeah.
Is they excuse themselves not respecting their own boundary and blame it on, well, he or she or them, they gaslit me, or they're abusive and they're not going to respect it. Right. Most people, this is what I tell them, are not going to respect your boundaries. And they go, what?
Yeah.
What
Yeah.
do I mean? And I go, it's your responsibility because your boundaries are for you. So what I would tell them to do is you have to follow through. So even if they don't respect you, even if they don't hear you, you respect you. You hear you. So if you say, I don't like being spoken to, or I don't feel respected when you speak to me that way, and they go too effing bad, I'm going to speak to you this way anyway, or whatever the case may be, you remove yourself from that conversation. You don't sit and debate and argue and try to prove or convince them to respect that boundary. You know why it's there. You don't like being spoken to that way. So remove yourself from the conversation with the person who refuses to speak to you the way you're asking to be spoken with.
Yeah.
And removing yourself, obviously, and you know, this is not the way you respect every boundary, because that's a very binary way to look at it. And I think that's another struggle people have with boundary setting here, is that they look at it as an all or nothing, like respect this or else we're not together. And that's not realistic.
Right. Right. That's an ultimatum. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And, but it's what a lot of people do after they've been in an abusive situation, because they go to extremes, and that extreme thinking is kind of part of the healing process, working through that and not thinking like all or nothing about everything or black and white about everything, but realizing that when you can trust you and feel safe with you through being able to self-validate, through being able to identify what you value and why you have those values and how to advocate for yourself, then you are able to communicate in those moments. And if someone's like, yeah, I don't see anything wrong with my behavior, right? Like, and all of this falls on a spectrum. So like a specific example of something extreme here would be someone like name calling you. Is most people don't want to be called names when they're in a conversation or in conflict. Nobody likes being called a bitch. But some people find being called a bitch not that big of a deal. I personally don't want anyone calling me I'll call myself a bitch if I'm being a bitch, but you don't get that right. Right? So, but I'm not going to cut off every relationship where someone shouts bitch at me. I'm going to let them know I'm not available for name calling because I'm not 12. And then if they go, well, and they make excuses, I'm going to uphold mine by saying, well, then we need to figure out how to communicate differently, because I'm not going to engage in further conversation with you if you're going to name call me and you're telling me too bad. So, you know, we're kind of now at a standstill. And if we want this relationship to continue, you either need to adjust or we find a different word. Like, call me something different that I don't find offensive, or maybe mature a little in your communication.
Yeah. Or if you have a problem with me, why don't you talk about what the issue is? But let's address
the actual problem instead of just like spouting off names to try to make your point or feel like you're being heard or whatever it is, right? But needless to say, to answer your question, like, they're responsible for upholding it, but upholding it like is not a black or white scenario. Sometimes it means speaking up. Sometimes it means removing yourself. Sometimes it means disengaging. Sometimes it means ending a relationship. It all doesn't mean ending a relationship though. And that's a real big takeaway.
Yeah. And your response is like right in line with what mine usually is. And it's that if somebody, and this is usually in the, not a 5-minute person, this is like in a relationship of some kind person, it's you have to remove yourself from the harm. if their boundaries not respected, like you said, you're going to walk away,
Yeah.
or you're going to say, don't speak to me that way. But then if you continue to let them speak to you that way and you say, without removing yourself in some way, you're not teaching them. You're teaching them that like the boundary's flexible.
Yes.
You make a change to uphold your own boundary, which means really like honoring your own self.
Yeah, respecting yourself.
Exactly.
That's the part of boundary setting that everybody, oh, I want to be respected. I want to be respected. Well, then respect you first.
Exactly. Yeah. And in being a single parent, I've had friends set boundaries with me around like, I can't make plans with you if there's a possibility that you're going to cancel. And I would say, well, there's always a possibility I'm going to cancel. Like my kid could get sick. The babysitter could cancel, like I don't have the ability just to, if I didn't have this and I said I was going to be there and you said that, that's fine. But I think being my friend means that there is a possibility I might cancel. It's never what I want. Like I had this one friend I was super close to, and that was her boundary. I can't make plans with you because it's unreliable. And I said, okay, I understand. And she was like, I'll make a plan with you on a weekday. And I'm like, that's even worse than a weekend for me, child wise. Like you bring this kid from school, you have no idea what you're getting yourself into. And
they need, well, and that's the nuance to this conversation, like it's not first of all, it sounds like that individual then just doesn't want to be flexible in understanding that when you have a child, like you as the parent have to be flexible because what comes up for that child is like, it's very unpredictable. I mean, at any age, for crying out loud, like mine's not even a year old yet, but like I never know what time he's going to wake up and have pooped himself.
Yeah.
Like I don't have control over that. So when people say to me now, like, what time, this just happened over the weekend, we were going to my parents' anniversary party and my mom was like, what time are you coming? And I said, I can let you know for sure that it will be before 11 a.m.
Yeah.
And I'm a very direct communicator. So I'm always going to tell you when I know. I said, but I'll have to text you the morning of to confirm the exact time because it's based on what time he wakes up in the morning. And she's like, okay, that's fine. Right. But with somebody who maybe doesn't want to understand that things are going to change now because I have a child, or like with you have a 7-year-old, they get sick at school. Your entire world changes the minute they have to stay home from school, and there might not be a babysitter.
You pick them up and you had no idea that they were sick, you pick them up and you're like, oh, this is not the evening that I thought we were going to have, based on, but like exactly what you said. But, I think in the past, I would have probably self-judged and been like, oh, I should be more reliable. But it's like, wait, I'm actually doing everything I can. Like I'm setting realistic expectations. I am making plans during times that I feel like are best for my child. It's like, I'm not going out, all day. It's like, earlier in the evening because I have to wake up for her. And it's like, I'm already making all these changes. I'm paying to spend time with you. And the flexibility isn't there. But if this person was sick, or if someone, I always think about it this way. It's like, but if they were like sick, would I ever be mad at them? If they're go to the vet?
That's what I always tell people to use as their gauge. Yeah. And I've heard so many people be like, oh my God, that's helped me so much. And it's, how would I want somebody to treat me? Or how would I want this spoken to me? Right. Or the other way around, like, how would I handle this situation if the roles were reversed? Like, would I be understanding and empathetic if my friend with a child had to cancel last minute? I would be. So if that's who I am and that's how I show up, right, then I expect that in return. And when I don't receive it, that's what causes the discomfort or the pain, because that doesn't align with what I value. So, you're going to treat me differently than the way I would treat you. And then what I always see, and I just want to touch on this because you just said it, but like a lot of people who have been through any type of trauma or abuse, we tend to self-blame very easily. We very quickly will take accountability, not just for ourselves, but too much responsibility for the entire situation. And so self-blame becomes this thing where we're like, is it me? Is it me? Like, should I change? Should I do better? I can do better. I will do better. And it's almost you continuing to abuse you.
Exactly.
While you're trying to heal. When the reality is, as you just mapped out in your example, like, I took responsibility for myself. I communicated on behalf of myself. Like, I did what was within control on my end. And now they're responsible for doing the same on their end. And the only time you should take a second and like reflect and see, okay, could I improve, is if someone points it out to you. And when you check in with yourself, you're like, yeah, I could see that. I agree.
Yeah.
Then own it and take some necessary steps to make a change there. But if when you self-check, if you're like, no, I don't see it. Nope.
Yeah.
Nope, I fundamentally disagree. That's not you. A lot of people project. We have to keep that in mind.
Yeah. I think that is one of those things that we really struggle with. Like, I know, and this was in my notes for us, was about how we end up taking it personally, that it's something to do with us, and I did take that example. I absolutely took personally at first. And then, but it was a quick turnaround to be like, wait, I am stating what I can do. I'm accountable. I'm apologetic. I didn't want this to happen, but this is where it is. And this is what I'm capable of. Okay. Doesn't work for her. Okay. Kind of ends there then. Like, if I'm saying I can, but I think that in the past, and I've seen this, I mean, of course I see this with myself. I see this with others, is that we take it personal. And I think especially in like those romantic relationships, when somebody's like, be this way, do this, do that. Like, we're not able to see in those moments the emotional immaturity that's coming out of them, or the projection, like you just said, because we're so used to looking at ourselves, right? As kids, I mean, I know I spent so much time by myself. It sounds like, in your story, you were trying to understand yourself. You felt different than others. You had your own emotional experience, and like you were given the same handbook essentially as others. And it was like, but so it must be me. But then learning that it's not personal, I feel like just it goes right in line with what we said before about like the healing journey. It's like, I think we're also probably on a healing journey to not take other people's actions and reactions personal all the time, which doesn't make us void of accountability when we're accountable. But I think it's about that boundary that, of like, am I actually accountable, or are they just projecting onto me?
Yeah. I mean, and that's right in line with the boundary conversation, because that is an invisible boundary almost for us, that a lot of us, and myself included, struggle with a lot from time to time. And that's just being accountable to yourself, or focused, maybe is the better word, on yourself in every interaction. I know for a large portion of my life, a lot of my relationships, whether they were romantic or friendships or family, I was so fixated on them. What can I say to make them understand? What can I do to make them agree, or them change their behavior? And I wasn't looking at me. And it was interesting because they were always blaming me. And I was then, my way of coping with that was blaming them. Like, no, they don't understand. It's not me, it's them. Right. And when I started functioning, and I have to kind of revisit this from time to time, but when I started realizing that I can't control other people and I can't change other people, and it's wasted breath and effort to try to prove or convince, others, I just need to focus on, how did I show up in this conversation? How did I show up in this environment? What did I bring to the table, right? What did I say? What did I do? And when I only look at that stuff, my relationships get a lot easier to navigate. They're not easy, but they get a lot easier to navigate when I'm not tangling myself up in all of their stuff and then trying to figure myself out through it, if that makes sense. But I'm just
totally. Yeah.
looking at me and only me. And then, that doesn't mean I lack empathy or compassion. That's still there, but it's more or less just being responsible for what I'm doing, what I'm saying, what I'm thinking, what I'm feeling. And then checking myself when something's tossed back at me clears up the pathway here for me to relate, which is the whole point of a relationship.
Exactly. Oh, and you say it like that. It's like, yeah. Oh, it's not so that you can control me and that I can just meet all your needs, that we can relate to each other. Right.
Yeah.
That's how we got here. Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of people that are struggling with understanding their role in a relationship are dealing with a lot of the projection, and like going through their values and getting to know their inner voice. Like you said, it definitely helps them not react every single time, and at the very least questioning it. And that's what I always say is a sign of healing, is like, if you're starting to question some of these things rather than just taking them as face value, it's going to be uncomfortable. But especially if you're in the relationship and you're constantly being gaslit. Like, I remember I had a partner, this happened twice actually. Two different partners told me I don't communicate well. And I was like, communicate for a living though. And they were like, yeah, but you don't communicate well. And I'm like, well, I never said that I communicate my feelings well, but I'm trying and I was trying so hard. I was writing things down. I was trying to I remember I read it I was like, look, you're saying I'm not communicating well. So I wrote down exactly what I want to say. And then it was like, well, and it's like, no, you just don't want to hear me. You just don't like my perspective. You just don't agree, because this is how I feel. It would require change on both ends. You clearly don't want to do that, and you want me just to change or to not feel this way or to do all these other things. And I've taken the feedback. I've taken it to my friends. I've taken it to my therapist. I've taken it back to myself. I've decided I actually do communicate well. No friend has ever told me that. If anything, I've been told I over communicate.
But that's the thing too. I think we're not always going to be able to skip the step of self-check. And if that moment turns into a week, 2 or a month of you asking around or reflecting on it in your own personal time and trying to find different ways, we all have a little internal checklist we have to go through before we can then go, no, I know I'm a good communicator. Right. And then there's other things that come up that you're just confident about, and you're confident about it because you've had a lifetime of practice or whatever. And so if somebody told me I'm not a good communicator now at 39, I would look at them and laugh. I wouldn't have anything else to say. I would just look at them and laugh and be like, okay, all right, that's comedic at this point in time. But if somebody told me, even I would say 10 years ago, you're not the best communicator, Amy, when you're, emotional or something, I might pause for a second and go, well, maybe there's validity to that. Let me take a look at it, because I always want to be better and I'm willing to do that. And that I don't think is a harmful thing to do. I think we just have to make sure we get to the point where we can at least find a way to self-validate and find that truth inside of ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah. I thank you so much for joining me today. There's so much more I want to talk to you about, so I hope that we can do this again.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people are really going to love this episode and really love you. Can you share how people can find you?
Absolutely. Yeah. So the best place to find me is on social media these days. I'm on Instagram or Threads a lot, and you can find me at Amy the Life Coach, or my website, amyfiedler.com. And there's tons of resources and courses on my website, or you can just click through on my social media page and find them. Things on rebuilding self-trust, ironically, boundary setting. And I'm working on a new course right now for reclaiming your inner voice. So helping you soothe that inner critic and tune into your voice and your truth within yourself.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, I will be sure to include your links in the show notes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again for joining me. I really enjoyed talking to you.
Oh, me too. Thank you so much for having me.